It's Monday, September 16th. I'm Adam Walsh, and this is The Signal. It's Climate Week, folks. For day one on this show, it's activism and advocacy. Young folks engaged in climate action and calling for change. We've got a packed studio, lots to talk about. Here we go. And to build on that introduction, right, because some folks might be like, oh, I didn't know it was Climate Week. Well, specifically for The Signal, it's Climate Week because we decided we're going to do a week of climate coverage. So here we are. It's our second year of doing this, right? 5 days with a climate change lens in front of and over every single show, right? That's the focus. Oftentimes, when you think about climate change, there can be feelings of despair, feelings of being overwhelmed with the force of it, feeling like it could be a losing battle. But if you look around, there's lots of climate action and people who have hope and people who are pushing through that despair as much as it can still be there and on our shoulders. So that's where this week comes in, all 5 days. Each day you will hear from folks working towards solutions. Even tomorrow for Gardening Day, still regular Gardening Day, folks, but there's a climate component to it. So just to kind of throw that out there in case people are curious. But from activism to field work, the voices this week have a common thread, the will and want to fix the planet. As you're listening to us today, if you've got thoughts, 709-327-8206 is the text line, and it is open. Amanda Gear's looking at me now, giving me a nod, being like, yes, the text line's open. Okay, she's laughing. Stop laughing. Okay, there we go. We're good for that. Emails, Amanda and I are both checking the emails, thesignal@cbc.ca, and if you just want to call and leave a message, 709-576-5260. All right, we've got a full house, and we're going to call someone halfway through. But I guess what I'll do is we'll whip around, and I'll get you to give me your best introductions of yourselves. Sophie Shoemaker, how you doing? Welcome back.
Oh, thanks. I'm doing well. I'm Sophie Shoemaker. I am a second-year political science student at MUN, and I'm also the co-president of Fridays for Future St. John's.
Excellent. Leah Movell, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. So give it top Sophie there with your own introduction.
My name's Leah Movell. I live on the Burin Peninsula. Graduated from Memorial University with a degree in political science. I have the great joy of serving as the volunteer coordinator for the Social Justice Co-op, and I've recently taken on another role as the Atlantic Regional Organizer for the Youth Climate Corps campaign.
Excellent. Jamie Hedrick, how are you doing?
Hi, yeah, I'm Jamie Hedrick. I'm the volunteer coordinator for Neighbours United, a registered Canadian charity that helps communities across the continent foster support for policies that help people and nature. And we have a new team here in St. John's who are learning about how people in the area feel about the future of the oil and gas industry here, especially in the face of climate change and the rising cost of living.
That's great. We're going to dig into all of this through the hour. Megan Scott, how about yourself?
Hello, I'm Megan Scott. I am the social media coordinator for Fridays for Future St. John's, and I am a marine biology student at MUN.
All right, so to jump off on this, I guess, oftentimes when I have folks on the show, there's always like the conversation at hand for the big issue that we're talking about, and I also like to know what wires people, right? They're wiring for who they are and then how they are, where they are for these conversations, right? So, Megan, let's start with you. Why I know why people are interested in climate change and fighting it and for climate action, but what got you involved with this personally?
So I'm from Port aux Basques.
Right.
So a few years ago, we had the massive hurricane come through and just ravage my hometown. I saw a lot of my neighbors' houses get torn down within the past few years, and currently our house is like one of the last few left on the street. So witnessing all that destruction and knowing that it's only going to get worse in the coming years because of climate change and knowing that things aren't changing really pushed me to do more.
How old are you now?
24.
24. And what have the conversations been like in and around for yourself with the community back home and the ones you've been having since what happened with Fiona?
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people don't like to think about the fact that it could get worse and the fact that we're a coastal community and we are at risk with sea level rising, with sea temperature changing, and with catastrophic events happening more frequently. I mean, between the hurricane and then there was a washout the few months prior to that in which we were stuck without the highway. Port aux Basques has been hit pretty hard with the climate change stuff.
Yeah.
And I feel like having conversations about it and around it, a lot of people are still a bit anxious about it, especially when we hear the winds come picking up and, storm surge might happen. People are a lot more anxious than they used to be.
Yeah, no, of course, right? To go through that and then sitting at home, anytime the wind, the creaks and cracks of your home, I can easily see how, your thoughts will go there.
Yeah, exactly.
Jamie Hedrick, what about yourself?
Gosh, that's a question that I've pondered a lot because I think it can be very difficult to pinpoint sort of the exact moment when, your life changes and you decide, I want to do something about an issue. Because for me, a lot of the time, I've realized I don't have an exact moment where I've thought, this is what I want to do sort of forever. This is what I want to fight for. But to me, it's a lot of smaller things. It's about looking at the people in my community and realizing how impacted we can be by even just little things, even just our summer's getting hotter and now you have to buy an air conditioning unit.
Yeah.
Even our winter storms getting more severe and unpredictable and, seeing the older people who live on my street having to pay for snow clearing services. And because those services are in such high demand, having to wait a long time to get shoveled out. And me, I'm so busy shoveling out my own mother that I want to help them, but I can't. And knowing that when I, eventually, I'm going to be moving away possibly, wondering who's going to be helping my own mother to be able to just have a normal life when we are starting to see the impacts of climate change on the island affect us all more and more, and just wanting to talk about it so that we can have a dialogue and think about what kind of future do we want to live in and what are things that just everyday people can do to walk in that direction.
Yeah, that kind of dialogue, it really can, as hard and scary as things can be, it can really help with community building, right?
Absolutely. I think that, I think it's really easy to get bogged down in feeling very hopeless about the climate, especially since, climate change is such an enormous issue. But the sort of thing of it is that, climate change and conservation challenges that we're facing, they're not just environmental problems, they're people problems. And if we want solutions, we need to work together. And it's by listening and sharing stories that we can overcome these issues that divide us. And that way we can move together towards a common goal. And instead of being against each other, and, we can listen to people who might disagree with us because we all have a common goal here.
Yeah, and it's about we're always going to have disagreements. For example, you can think of a term like managed retreat, right? So you look at the coast and worry over what can happen, and there's going to be disagreements, a lot of feelings over that. But it's like you're saying, the conversations are so important for understanding and hearing, and then to try to figure out how to take those steps forward.
Absolutely.
Leah, what about yourself?
Well, it's a big question. How did I get here? Sometimes I don't know.
I ask that every day when I sit down here at my job. So yeah, believe me, I understand.
Like I said, I grew up on the Burin Peninsula, so in rural Newfoundland. I kind of grew up in the woods as a kid. My parents were into sort of self-sufficiency and kind of off-the-grid living. And so I had a very strong connection to the natural world around me, but also kind of an awareness that society's not being run for the good of most people, and a frustration and a bit of a rage with that. And I think what kind of led me to study political science is trying to figure out how it works such that society is not being run for the good of most people. Or for the good of life or the planet or wellness. It's run in service of profit, and I've always found that deeply disturbing. And I think that's how I ended up in the world of social justice and climate activism. And I'm really grateful to have been able to find a way to make a living in doing this work through the work I do with the Social Justice Co-op, through the community that funds that work, and through on and off contract work with other campaigns that bring me a sense of like hope and energy, like this work that I'm doing with the Youth Climate Corps campaign. And yeah, very grateful to be able to have values aligned work, which I haven't always had. And it's, it's a really tough situation, really kind of hard, emotionally, mentally draining situation to find yourself kind of struggling to make a living in work that forces you to like abandon your values. And I've definitely been there. Yeah. And to not be there is a really healthy thing. And it gives me more energy to kind of be more engaged. And so one of the things I think is really powerful about the Youth Climate Corps vision, for example, is more people having an opportunity to do values-aligned work and to kind of have that experience and be able to have energy left to engage with, your neighbors and your community and issues, and not only to engage with them through work, but to have a job that isn't so draining that you don't have anything else left to give.
Yeah, and before we go to Sophie here, and we're going to talk some more, we've got someone who we're going to be calling now in 14 minutes or so to talk more about this, but just give us the overall explainer on and you wrote a great piece for The Independent on this, right? So folks, just Google Leah Movell commentary, The Case for a Youth Climate Corps for The Independent. You can read all about it. So great work there, but just give us for radio purposes, tell us about the case that you make in the commentary that you wrote.
Yeah, so the Youth Climate Corps campaign has been ongoing for over a year and is made up of youth across so-called Canada who are mobilizing for good green jobs available to anyone under 35, doing climate work in their communities. So I got involved with the campaign in June, and the vision I found really hopeful and exciting. The campaign is advocating for a national federally funded public jobs training program, work and jobs training program in areas related to the climate crisis. So we imagine sort of 3 categories of work that participants of a Youth Climate Corps would engage in. And the first would be emergency preparedness and response. So when we have situations like Hurricane Fiona, which are only going to become, I think, more frequent as we sort of get deeper into the impacts of the climate crisis, having a dedicated workforce to call on to help communities survive those situations.
Yeah, as opposed to sometimes when the military gets called in, and there have been discussions from the military over the military readiness for other things globally, for why we have a military in Canada, as opposed to responding for climate disasters. And so now the case here is to have folks 35 and under who are part of some kind of a response.
Yeah.
Correct? Okay.
So one of the streams of work of the Climate Corps being emergency response, so that the military isn't the only tool that can be called on in those situations, because truthfully, it's not a great tool in those situations. And also the military doesn't want to respond to those situations. So I think having a more dedicated, proactive, diverse workforce could be really powerful in helping communities make sure that everybody gets through these crises. And we know that or as much as is possible, checking on vulnerable community members, people who are isolated or dealing with mobility issues, for example. There's all kinds of research that suggests that people who are marginalized in society in other ways are also marginalized in emergency response proceedings. So I think having a Youth Climate Corps to focus on that kind of work could really improve the work that happens when disasters hit and we have to respond. The other kind of 2 streams of work, one is to strengthen local ecosystems, so things like ecosystem restoration, making forests more resistant or resilient to wildfires, moving houses away from an eroding shoreline. Yeah. And then the other stream of work would be in reducing everyday greenhouse gas emissions. So building retrofits, decarbonizing the grid, these types of work.
Yeah, and it's a big call, and there's lots there, and we'll get in about 10 minutes or so when we get Juan on the line from we're calling Alberta to continue that conversation a little bit. But thanks for laying that out, because it gives us a lot for this discussion over thinking about what one type of action could be, and that's a giant one for a climate youth climate corps, 35 and under, and like you were saying in your piece, they're ideally unionized jobs with a bunch of different streams there. Yeah,
I should say briefly too, we're envisioning like a 2-year work placement program that would be an opportunity for like continuing education. So for like especially the trades-based work that would be happening within the youth climate corps, the idea is that participants would leave the climate corps with something close to like a Red Seal certification to continue working in that field and continue doing climate work after their experience with the corps.
Sophie Shoemaker, how's it going?
It's going well. Thank you.
Remind us again about your evolution from you going to university, post-secondary, and then you were looking at the activism side of things, right, with Fridays for Future. How did, and I know we talked about like a year ago, because this is or half a year ago. Anyways, this is your second time on the show talking specifically about this, but give us a reminder of how you got involved with Fridays for Future and why it's so important for you.
So I think the beginning of it, as a child, all I really cared about was the ocean, and I was really interested in politics. And those were like the two things that I wanted to talk about, and anything else I was like, this is stupid. So I got my diving certification when I was 12 years old, and I loved it, and it was just like the best thing ever. And then shortly after that, I learned that they were estimating at the time, I don't know if this statistic is still real, but at the time they were saying that in 2050 there was going to be no more fish left in the ocean. And that was devastating to me. And so around that time was, I think, the first climate strike that Fridays for Future had ever had. And I was so upset about the state of the world. And so my dad was like, let's go to the climate strike, because, in his mind, it was a way for me to be involved in fixing the problem.
That's really neat.
Yeah. And so I went, and I loved it, and I thought it was really cool. But I also didn't really know that I could get involved at that time. Like I was, 12 or 13, and, it wasn't something that I knew how to get involved in. So I would, sign a lot of petitions, and I would go to the climate strikes, but I didn't actually get involved in organizing until last year. Yeah, at the beginning of last year. There was some leaders that were looking to kind of evolve and pass on their legacy a little bit, because they were graduating university. And so, they reached out to me because they knew I had been interested in the past. And I was like, sure, I'll come to a meeting. And then I came to a lot of meetings. And, next thing, we're here. And it's been incredibly fulfilling pretty much from the time that I got into the organization. It is the best way for me to, I'm worried about the state of our world pretty much all the time. So it is the way that I am able to, contribute and control the situation in some way. And I'd rather do something than do nothing and sit at home and be worried. So
yeah, never so often shake your hand at clouds and wondering, feeling kind of helpless.
Exactly.
Or something, right? Climate strike coming up.
Yes.
Friday.
Very excited.
Tell us about it.
Yeah. So we have the climate strike coming up on Friday, on September 20th. It's from 2 to 4 at the Munn Clock Tower, starting at the Munn Clock Tower. And we're also partnering with Youth Climate Corps, and they're going to be doing a really cool mural painting beforehand, and it's going to be a great time. So, yeah.
So I love that I knew none of this as I was trying to plan the show. And then as I got the guests together, it's like, oh, actually, yes, we're all doing stuff. I'm like, of course, it makes sense. Small world, Newfoundland and Labrador regardless. And then once you're on the climate file, of course. Leah, tell us about the mural and how that's going to work.
Yeah, so the mural that we're doing in St. John's is part of a series of actions that are happening in about a dozen communities across so-called Canada, where we're painting murals that reflect visions for a youth climate corps. And the idea is to send MPs back into the fall session of Parliament with a very strong mandate to invest in the Youth Climate Corps. Our demand
which
right
kicks
now,
off today, right? Today's the first day back
Today's
in
the
Ottawa.
first day.
So the end of the week, or the first day back for the fall, for as members of Parliament from across the country sit back down in Ottawa to have discussions and debates. You're trying to make it so that this is part of the focus.
We want our $1 billion investment demand to be on the top of their minds. $1 billion investment would create the first 20,000 Climate Corps jobs in 2025. We know that the Liberal government is interested in making a Youth Climate Corps happen because they did plan to consult on one in their 2024 budget. And so we're ramping up our organizing and doing this day of action, week of action, depending on weather and partnering with other events, to make sure that they know that we want them to come into consultations with a guaranteed investment.
So what's the energy coming into this climate strike, right? Because when I remember one I covered pre-pandemic, the road, the parkway outside of CBC here in St. John's, blocked all the way up to Confed, right? It was a big day, young folks out with signs, big movement. Where are we right now with things for energy around this? And do you think things have changed?
I don't want to say I'm pessimistic.
Yeah.
But since COVID, I don't know. I feel like people have been so down in the dumps about it all that I feel like we lost a bit of momentum, but I'm hoping it's coming back.
So do you think some of that hopelessness crept in then? Because the pandemic itself, obviously, other shows to be done on the impacts it had on us and everyone and feelings around lots of things, right? And the hurt and damage that was done. On the climate activist side of things, you had momentum, and then the world hit a pause button for health.
Yeah.
And now trying to crawl back.
Yeah, I think it's bringing back the momentum we had. And I think a lot of people are coming through that with a lot of momentum, and they're building it up, and the community is building it up together. But at the same time, it's almost like, we need to get back at it. We took a pause for a few years because there was not much we could do, but we need to get back to it. And there is no more pause button because climate change doesn't have a pause button.
Right.
So we need to continue the work. We need to continue to lobby politicians, and we need to continue to show them that this is what we care about.
So what do folks in your orbit say, right? So because there's when you join something like Fridays for Future, there's those folks who are attached to that, right? But then you've got other friends out there, family, neighbors, you name it. What are people saying when you talk to them about climate change and climate action? What do you hear from people?
I get a mixed bag.
Okay.
I get that mixed bag of like, well, what can we do about it? There's not much we can do. We're just one person. And I'm like, yes, but multiple one persons means a lot of more than one person. So bringing us together for common causes, I think ignites something in people. So I think that's exciting. And there's a lot of people, especially because I'm in science, plenty of people are like, climate change is, top of their radar. So I see a lot of people coming through and being like, no, I want to do something. Yeah,
so you're seeing folks, the motivation to go into their course of study was climate change and is climate change.
Yeah, for a lot of people, it was. My first undergrad was at Grenfell, and we're an environmental school. So a lot of people came through that degree were like very conscious of the fact that climate change is going to change their scope of learning throughout the years.
Sophie, what about yourself when it comes to organizing? Because as is the in your position as co-president, right? It's a lot of responsibility, and you're motivating folks. Is it a hard thing to do?
So it's it's definitely difficult as Megan said, but I think that what's really I see that motivation kind of coming back to people, because post-pandemic, as they said, it has been hard, but, there's all of these partnerships between different activism groups in the city that, we've never experienced before. Like our mural painting thing, we didn't have that idea. That was the amazing people at the Youth Climate Corps. And, we've had a lot of support from different organizations in, grassroots organizations in the community, like MUN Students for Palestine and Palestine Solidarity NL and, Youth Climate Corps. And I think while there might not be always, public, what's the word,
support.
Yeah. There's always going to be people and organizations in your corner. And I think we're sort of building a community of people that really care and really are, on our side in a lot of this stuff. And I think too, in my circles, what I've found is that older people tend to be a little more like worried that we're being impolite. Like that's how I feel.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. Like that protesting, lobbying, all of these things are kind of seen as impolite or, improper. And the feedback I've gotten a lot is like, don't be too, hippy dippy.
Which is ironic given perhaps the ages of some of these people who might be saying it and some of the protests that went on when they were young people.
Yes, exactly. But, we've gotten a lot of feedback of like, don't be too hippy dippy or people just won't listen to you, which fair enough. But also if you're not quote unquote hippy dippy enough and you don't advocate for yourself, then no one's going to hear you. So, but then from a lot of young people, we have a lot of people that are really worried about climate change and, are really driven to fight and to change things and to hear the answer yes for once and, to be listened to by our government. And so there's a lot of young people that are really, striving for change. So
you're listening to The Signal. This is Climate Week, day one. Every day this week, we're going to have climate-focused coverage, stories. You're going to hear from folks today. The focus, right? We're talking about advocacy. We're talking about activism. It's youth forward. It's talking about folks who are pushing for change. So that's who's here. Some of the folks here with me in studio, right? People who want to work towards solutions. The common thread for the whole week, right? From field work to activism, the common thread is the will and want to try to fix the planet. And it's a big task, but you can put some effort into it if you want some action. So if you have thoughts for us, text us 709-327-8206. Email us thesignal@cbc.ca, or you can call the Signal line and leave a message, and we'll play it later in the week, 709-576-5260. Here with me in studio, you were just listening to Sophie Shoemaker, their co-president of Fridays for Future. We've got Leah Movell here, the Atlantic Regional Organizer for the Youth Climate Corps campaign. Jamie Hedrick is here with Defend Our Island, Neighbours United. And Megan Scott, Social Media Coordinator, Fridays for Future. We're going to go to the phones. Juan Vargas is on the line, Prairie Organizer with the Climate Emergency Unit. Good morning. How you doing?
Hi, good morning, Adam. I'm good. How are you?
Good. Well, thanks for coming on the show, and thanks for getting up early. Well, I mean, it's not too early in Edmonton, but it's still morning nonetheless before the start of your day. So thanks for doing this. Tell us about why you got involved with the Climate Emergency Unit, if you could.
Yeah, certainly. It's great to be with you all this morning. As a lot of you might expect, my family was a family that was involved within the fossil fuel industry. We moved originally from Colombia to Quebec, then to Alberta to look for work in the fossil fuel industry and oil and gas. And that painted my childhood a lot, obviously in part because it means that, you don't get to spend all the time that you want with your parents, particularly my dad, who was a welder and had to travel quite a lot. So as the years rolled by, as you kind of see the impact that an industry like that has on people's bodies, you kind of get a picture of what it looks like to be so, in my opinion, handcuffed to an industry like that. But also on the other side is that as I was, getting older and getting through, later high school, I kind of started hearing the story of, well, you don't have to graduate, just go work in the patch. You're always going to have work in the oil and gas industry. And then that stopped being the case. And so I would say that, I've been driven to start doing climate work in large part because of that pull towards that economic justice, but also, seeing the impacts of the industry and seeing the ways in which it unrelentlessly relying on the industry has left us kind of backed into a corner. And so I get really excited in fighting for alternatives, and I get really excited in fighting for, alternative visions of what we can do here that isn't just fossil fuels.
You mentioned moving around, right, with your family because of jobs. It's something that in Newfoundland and Labrador, and I know you know this because you're in Alberta, but it's something that in Newfoundland and Labrador a lot of people understand, right? Fly in, fly outs, folks going away for work. It's happened for generations here in this province. When we spoke last week, you were telling me about the importance of having, because there's the green jobs you're fighting for and pushing for and calling for, but then there's also the fact that you talked to me about the importance of having jobs in people's hometowns. Can you elaborate on that for folks?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you were mentioning earlier about, wanting to fight for people to have green jobs. I'm fighting for people to have jobs flat out, right? Like if you care about the environment and you want a good green job, we'll want to welcome you. If you just want a job, we'll welcome you anyways. And I think that, when you look at places like Newfoundland, where there's a large need for transition, where a lot of people are highly reliant on moving away from home, where there are, much like in Alberta, a lot of rural places that are very rapidly losing their young people to work elsewhere. It is exactly that. Like, there is no shortage of work to be done when we kind of look around, whether it's looking at emergency preparedness, whether it's looking at the quality of our buildings, whether it's looking at how we're taking care of our neighbors. There is no shortage of work to be done. And so when we think about a Youth Climate Corps, we think about a program that turns literally no one away. As many people as apply is as many people as we should welcome in. And because there is no shortage of work, because there are so many cities, municipalities around the country that already have a plan on what they want to do when it comes to climate, but don't have the people, we say look to that. And where you don't have municipalities that don't have plans, we say let's build it with you. So that kind of starts to give you a really large idea of what kind of green jobs could look like. It isn't just about renewable energy. It isn't just about labor work. There is we've kind of run the idea of all the way from labor all the way to hard labor to healthcare work, which obviously is still labor, but kind of building a really large idea of what it looks like to have a good green job, so that as many people as possible are welcomed into the vision of it.
Especially at a time where the last numbers I was looking at, youth unemployment in this country is up too, right?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's something that we kind of see. There's a Youth Climate Corps is not the silver bullet to the just transition, but we see it as something that would make such a large difference for hundreds of thousands of people in this country, starting with young people who have the possibility to transform their communities and transform their relationship with the environment and transform the relationship of their neighbors with the environment.
What's the political pickup on this? Whether it's, I know there's been heavy lobbying with the governing Liberals, right? There's been discussions, I think, with the NDP. Where are things at with what's NDP saying? What are the Conservatives saying? Because I'm just thinking within the next year, there's going to be a federal election and things can change.
Yeah, absolutely. So we were able to commission a poll around this time last year, which asked people from all political backgrounds, to explain to them the vision of the Youth Climate Corps, and then it asked them, would you support this? And what we saw is that across party lines, there is widespread support from this. Whether you are a Green, whether you are a Conservative, overwhelmingly people support creating this type of public program. Within the party system, we know that there is advancement within the federal Liberals and the government. They want to act on it. We think that they should act on it faster. No surprise. The NDP has also been pretty big allies on this. Laurel Collins, the MP for Victoria, last year introduced a motion, private member's motion, to support a Youth Climate Corps, which again had support from the NDP, it had support from the Greens, it had support from a handful of Liberals, and no Conservatives. So we think that this is actually quite a big disconnect between the Conservatives and what their membership wants, given that evidently Conservative voters support this. And we know that in the United States, where they have instituted a program like this, Conservative, like Republican voters support a Youth Climate Corps until it gets spun, right? Until it gets spun by politicians. So we actually just see this as a huge, blind spot within the Conservative. not that there is much of a conservative climate platform is the problem, right? And so we see it as a gap between what members want and what politicians are saying. But across the board, we have gotten so much support, and we're excited to continue to build that support because we know that it's almost quite a no-brainer. Like, it's a quite intuitive program. When you explain it to people, they get excited. They say, yeah, no duh. And so we're excited to kind of keep building that momentum around that.
Juan Vargas, thank you so much for coming on the program.
Yeah, thank you so much. Have a great day.
You too. Juan Vargas there, the Prairie organizer with the Climate Emergency Unit. We were talking to Juan. Juan's in Edmonton. Any thoughts on what Juan was saying, folks?
I would actually really love to talk about what Juan said, because I think that it really connects to a lot of what Neighbours United is doing here in St. John's. I am on the recent graduate side. I'm not going to say that I just got out of university, but it hasn't been too long. And I was job hunting for almost a year. It was something that was pretty challenging for me, and I'm sure everybody out there, no matter how old or young you are, has had that experience of looking for a job. And it was quite the struggle. It was very difficult to find work that was suitable to me. And one of the things that I found pretty consistently as I was searching for jobs is that a lot of the time, the only jobs that had sort of, they were available to a lot of people, there weren't a lot of barriers to entry, that actually paid a wage that was not just a living wage, but a thriving wage. A lot of them, and in fact, I would say almost all of them, were in the oil and gas industry, which is the sort of thing that, I would be scrolling through, and I would be, I'd be seeing this, especially because it was really important to me to stay in Newfoundland. I wanted to be close to my family and my loved ones. I didn't want to have to move across the country in order to find good work. And, because of the money being so attractive in the oil and gas industry, I had a moment myself where I was going, am I going to have to compromise my values and, apply for one of these jobs? And I'm sure that it's even harder for people who don't have, the support of their parents to be able to, for example, live with them while they're job hunting, for people who, in fact, have more dependents than I do, and especially for those who don't have a post-secondary education. Their options are even smaller. So, seeing these jobs was very much like, I was like, am I going to have to sacrifice my values in order to have a good paying job close to home? And I consider myself very lucky that it did not come to that I was able to find the job that I have now, because many Newfoundlanders, including, especially young people, are struggling with a high cost of living. And, we don't want to have to work, long hours in dangerous fields that take us away from our, rotational work. It takes you away from your family sometimes for weeks at a time. And, unfortunately, people don't have many options. And I think one of the things that's so fabulous about a youth climate corps is that it's talking about options for people so that young people can stay and live in their communities and do things that benefits
and
the world around us and our community.
Yeah, and work in, and you've been saying, we've been talking through the hour, it's about so staying in your community, having a job that allows you to not just like survive, but thrive. And
Absolutely.
Then also one that kind of fits squarely in this big transition that is happening of greening the economy and seeing where the future brings us. So then Jamie, tell us a bit more about Defend Our Island and Neighbours United for like some of the work that is being done around it.
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, I want to say how lucky I consider myself. I'm someone who I now work for a living wage, which, it's funny to say a living wage like it's a privilege, but to be honest, to so many of my friends, they essentially think of me as rich for having a job that allows me to pay for all of my expenses and have money left over.
And that's not that's not this out there concept of you're like, I have a little bit of money left over from my paycheck, right? Like that. That doesn't sound like a luxury to me, but for a lot of folks, yes, of course it will be, because of the cost of living crisis that we've been living through, and then also there's a housing crisis, and you name it. There's a bigger discussion here with this.
Adam, it's heartbreaking. Right now, my partner is going to school, and when I got this job, we were celebrating, of course, and the thing that my partner said to me that absolutely just was devastating to me is, we might be able to live in a house someday. And I thought, how is it that this is a dream? To be able to live in our own house someday, that we're young people, where we're educated and we are, we're working, and that this is something that seems like a total, wow, like if we maybe someday. And, you know, that's the thing that's like really heartbreaking, you know, and luckily, like today I work for an organization that not only aligns with my values, you know, has me working towards the causes that I believe in, but, you know, provides me with a living wage. And I think that we have an opportunity in Newfoundland to establish this as the norm for all people who care about and, you know, call Newfoundland home. You know, we can have good paying jobs that don't put our oceans and our wildlife and our clean air and water at risk. And I think that that's the sort of thing that's only going to happen if we say this is what we want and that we work towards it.
So what's your work like, right? Because it's a green job, Defend Our Island, Neighbours United. Like, what do you do in the run of a week or whatever?
That's a great question. So a lot of, you know, I definitely think this connects to what Sophie was saying earlier about there's this kind of dichotomy that you struggle with when you work in environmental, you know, in an environmental field where, you know, you want to be fighting for what you believe in, but you also don't want to alienate people. You know, you don't want people to go like, oh, well, you know, you're just so, you know, you're too green for me. I don't get it.
You don't want people to look at you like you're a jar of hornets, right? You know, you're like, wait, no, the lid's on. Like this is I'm a nice person.
Yeah, but the thing is though is that these are issues that impact all of us. You know, climate change impacts all of us, and we're all affected by it, regardless of like who you are and, you know, where you stand. And so what my job is, what the Defend Our Island campaign is about, talking to each other. And if you're listening to this right now, actually, it's very possible that you've met me before because I've knocked on your door. Because we go out and right now, like I'm a volunteer coordinator, we are training volunteers to come out with us and knock on people's doors and have these conversations and say, like, what do you think about the future of the oil and gas industry here? What do you think about the ways in which you're impacted by climate change and the cost of living? Just to get this conversation started, because I have encountered so many people all across, like people who are new Canadians, people who have lived in Newfoundland, you know, for decades. And one of the things that I have seen so often is people feeling like their opinion doesn't matter. Like people say to me, they're like, oh, well, I don't really know. I don't really think, you know, anyone's going to listen. And to me, that is so awful. And it kind of hurts my heart to think that, you know, these people who love Newfoundland and call it home think that their opinion doesn't matter about when it comes to things like the future that we want to see here. So we go and we talk to people, just ordinary people, and say, what future do you want to live in? And what do you think we can do to start walking in that direction?
What are the conversations like with folks who are working in oil and gas when you run into them?
Well, it's interesting because that's one of the things that I was a little bit nervous about at first, because I understand that there can be a very polarizing experience where I never want to be in a position where I'm talking to someone who works in the oil and gas industry and they feel like I'm trying to take away their livelihood, because that is the opposite of what I want.
And correct me if I'm wrong, and you're not trying to shame people here either,
Not
right?
at
You're
all.
out having a conversation, so tell me more about that.
Absolutely. I actually have had some conversations with people who are either current or former, oil and gas workers. And, you know, one of the things that I always say to them is, I'm like, what's it like? How is it?
Yeah.
Do you get treated well? Do you get paid well? Do you get to see your family? You know, what is it like for you? Because I genuinely care a lot about that. And I think that unfortunately, not enough people do. And one of the questions I ask is, I say, you know, like one of the things that I've been hearing from a lot of people, and this is true, is that a lot of people don't think that the CEOs of these big oil and gas companies that are drilling offshore in our province have the best interests of people like you and me in mind when it comes to issues like climate change and the cost of living. And without fail, almost every single person I talk to, including those who work in oil and gas, say they absolutely don't. And to me, that is so upsetting to hear that these people, you know, who depend on these jobs for their livelihood and trust that they are going to be able to go to work and make a paycheck that supports their family, they don't feel like they don't feel like their best interests are held in mind. And, you know, I say, like, what would you like to see changed in how oil and gas is managed in our province? And I think that it's so incredible to talk to people who, even if they don't necessarily agree with me, you know, even like I personally would like to see, a phase out of oil and gas. I would like to see it replaced by energy alternatives that are small scale and that benefit, you know, Newfoundlanders first. And I would like to see retraining programs for oil and gas workers to be able to get good work in other fields. Like, you know, the last thing I want is more people out of a job. And the fact that I can have these conversations with people and, you know, even if we disagree, people can say, like, you know, I see your perspective. And I think that at the end of the day, we want the same thing, which is, a Newfoundland that we can all live enjoy in with clean waters and good jobs.
No, totally, right? Like it's a provincial conversation for Newfoundlanders and Labradorians, for folks to be engaged, thinking about climate change and thinking about that transition that we keep talking about. I'm thinking for the climate strike on Friday, there's some asks this time, right? There's always asks. And there's not a quiz, but Megan, what are the asks?
So we have 5 asks this time around. They're very similar to our last asks. So we asked that the government of Newfoundland and Labrador declare a climate emergency, one that we've been asking for a little while.
Yeah.
We asked that the government of Newfoundland and Labrador invest substantially in public transit infrastructure province-wide, so not just in the metro region. We asked that the government of Newfoundland and Labrador cease the subsidies of oil and gas companies, because quite a bit goes into them. We asked that the provincial legislation that bans advertising for oil and gas companies. And then our last one, which is new, we asked the government of Newfoundland and Labrador divest from entities investing in ecocide and genocide.
Right. Hey, question on the advertising. What do you mean for the advertising side of things?
So if you've been watching TV and
I have.
Yes. Sometimes you see some pesky little commercials for oil and gas companies. We're not asking for, like them, if they're sponsoring, to not have their name sponsor things. We're asking if, we could get away from the TV ads that glamorize oil and gas.
Yeah. So if there's a I don't know, a community honey harvesting event that is sponsored by an oil and gas company, you're not calling for to not have that. But when I go and maybe watch TV later in the night about community honey harvesting, if it's a big special television show, you don't want the ads on the TV side of it.
Yeah, totally. Or like if you're watching YouTube, you'll oftentimes get an ad for, an oil and gas company. And like that's not really cool, because a lot of the ads are just false.
Absolutely.
They're just not true. And so not only is it like promoting something that is bad for our climate, it's just misleading. And
you're questioning the spin around, the ad part of it, right? Because all ads, any ad has got a certain amount of spin for getting you to be in favor of whatever it is they're advertising, right?
Absolutely. But unfortunately, the way that the world has been structured and how ingrained oil and gas is into our everyday, a lot of people, their only idea of what oil and gas is from those ads, is like, oh, well, a Harvey's helps me heat my home or whatever. And,
And it does, though. Harvey's does do that.
And it does, for sure. That's not untrue, but the way that they present it in a fashion where it's like, we can't exist without this. If we didn't have this, no one would be happy ever again. When in reality, those things aren't really true. It's misleading and it's harmful.
Well, and just to move the local company away for a second to like think of a bigger example, right? So some of the big multinational ones, like sometimes you'll look at ads that look very, if you didn't know what the topic was, you would think it was a green environmental ad or something like that, right? Like I'm just thinking of my
100%.
Lifetime of growing up, and so I can understand where issue can be taken if that, and like I said, I'm not picking on anyone here, but that was just one from me growing up and just observing, right?
That's a way better example. I was just pulling something.
No, totally, no, and I get it, right? I started the show talking about it's easy to feel despair, right? And then people who have hope and people who are trying to push through, fix the planet, all that stuff. Where are you in all of this? Like, are there days, is it like Monday, hey, I'm feeling pretty hopeful today, by Friday it's like, oh, like where are you? Because you're all front and center in advocacy and activism in something that can feel really overwhelming.
I think it's Miriam Kaba who says hope is a practice.
Okay.
It's not something that you just have. It's a practice. It's something you do. It's something you do every day. It's something you do in community if you're fortunate enough to have community around you. And we know we live under a system that is continually wanting to separate us from our community. So I think, doing this work together is a source of hope. And, some days I do feel the feeling of hope come upon me, but a lot of the time it is a practice and it's a choice.
Okay. Anyone else?
I'd say my activism brings me hope, kind of similar to what you said. You kind of have to practice it. Someone who's studying marine biology and hoping to do a master's soon. I study echinoderm diseases. So a lot of the diseases end up coming back to, the sea level temperature is changing, which means in turn they're getting sick. And it's stressful and it's scary. But at the same time, I'm like, if I just sit in a wallow of despair all the time, I'm not going to get anything done.
No.
So I need to practice hope, like you said, and I need to push through it and find light in other things. And that light is in activism.
Jamie?
I'm so glad you asked this, actually, because I think that it's really easy to look at people who, are going out and doing the kind of work that all of us do and think, like, how can you stand to think about this so much? And I've talked to a lot of people on the doors who are like, I don't think about this. I don't think about climate change because I can't, because I just have too many other things to worry about. I'm trying to put food on the table and live my life. But I have never been more hopeful than I have been in doing this work because I see the impact of it. And it's funny because in this job, I've had to really sort of reset my mind a little bit because it's funny to go and knock on people's doors and say, like, let's have a conversation. You feel like you're bothering people. But I have had so many people say, thank you so much for talking to me. I'm really glad that we got to talk together. And it's such a hope building exercise to be able to talk to just regular people in your community and say, I care about your opinion. I care about your vision for the future. I want to know what the Newfoundland of your dreams looks like. And I want your suggestions on what we can do to walk towards that vision. And it can be very difficult, being the volunteer coordinator, where a lot of my job is, trying to get people to come out and come on the doors with people. It can be hard to convince them, it's actually super fun to go and knock on people's doors. But to be honest, it is my absolute favorite thing that I do and I look forward to it because I think that nobody knows Newfoundland like the people who love it, and nobody loves Newfoundland like the people who are here. Whether you just got here, whether this is like, you're, a new Canadian, you just put down roots, or whether your family has lived here for generations. I think that are no people who are more caring and passionate and thoughtful and I have encountered such incredible wisdom. And to me, that's the future. Like if we're putting all of our hopes on, our decision makers to do the right thing, then we're going to be doing a lot of sitting and pacing anxiously. But if we say I'm going to talk to my neighbor and I'm going to say, what do we want? And we start there, that's when we realize that we hold a lot more of the cards than we think we do. And that we can actually, overcome and think about what we want and think about how to get it. And what we want is a Newfoundland where we can all afford to live a beautiful life on an island with clean air, healthy soil, and clean waters.
Sophie Shoemaker.
Yeah, I mean, I really agree with everything that everyone said there. I feel like my mindset is always to go in with, the thought of like, focus on the wins, but analyze the losses. So, when let's say you present a petition, if it doesn't go through or it doesn't go well, assess why it didn't, go well, but don't dwell on the fact that it didn't pass. Don't look at it and say, oh my gosh, that was so terrible. That was such a failure. And, get really down on the world, because ultimately, life is about wins and losses and everything in between. And, so I think when you're doing this work, you have to just try and just be positive sounds.
Well, yeah, you're kind of saying look, dust yourself off, because guess what? Tomorrow's coming.
Yeah.
And with each day, as hard as it might be, there's opportunity. And so don't dwell on the losses. Learn from them and keep putting one step forward each day at a time.
I think when burnout happens, or when the people that don't always stick with activism, it's because the quote unquote failures were too difficult, and looking at them and analyzing them felt too hard. So yeah.
There you go. Not to cut you off, but thank you. We're out of time. Thank you, folks. That's day one of Climate Week. Sophie Shoemaker, Leah Movell, Jamie Hedrick, and Megan Scott. Thank you so much for being here today. Folks, the conversation continues tomorrow. Gardening Day, yes. Regular gardening questions accepted, of course. Dan Rubin, author of Sun's Seed and Soil Tips and Techniques for a Northern Garden, will be here. We'll take your gardening questions, but on top of that, we're having a gardening and climate change discussion around farming. And if you've got thoughts around climate change and your observations for gardening, get in touch with us tomorrow and with those regular questions. Until then, catch you later, and thanks for listening.